Hey everyone, it's Sammy from Pushsquare, and I bet you're wondering whether Resident Evil 7 is any good with PlayStation VR, right? Well, you'll find a full review of the game itself elsewhere on the channel, but in this video I'm going to speak specifically about the virtual reality mode, which can be used throughout the entirety of the game's campaign. So this isn't a separate option, this isn't like a mini game or anything like that. You can play the entirety of Resident Evil 7's story campaign in virtual reality, and it's actually quite impressive, but there are a few caveats. Now, I played through the entire game on my standard television first and foremost. So I was familiar with all of the environments and all of the jump scares and all of that sort of stuff. But putting on the virtual reality headset was quite eye-opening actually, because anybody that's used PlayStation VR will know that it adds a sense of scale to environments that you just don't get on a normal TV. And seeing these familiar locations, the whole game kind of takes place on a plantation. Seeing like familiar locations, familiar rooms, then suddenly blown up into virtual reality and surrounding me was quite an amazing moment. It's certainly impressive, and while the visuals do take a hit, they don't take as much of a hit as you may expect actually. It looks very realistic in virtual reality. It's pretty good. And Capcom's gone to a lot of work here. For example, the menu system. When you boot up the game and you load it up, they've created like a little virtual reality environment for you to sit in, and there are lots of nice little touches like that they've really, you can tell they've really gone to a lot of trouble to make the virtual reality experience as immersive and as fully fledged as it possibly can be. But there is a caveat. So I don't think the way the controls work in virtual reality is very comfortable, to be honest with you. Now again, to be fair to Capcom, they've put a lot of options in. You, as default, turn in kind of increments, and you can set the size of those increments. So you can turn in 90-degree angles, you can turn in 30-degree angles, whatever you prefer, whatever's most comfortable for you. And then to sort of fine-tune where you move, you kind of look to the left and the right, and as you're pushing forward, you'll move slightly in those directions. But the kind of increment turning is if you want to turn like big motions, and that's fine. But I didn't like that option very much at all, to be honest. It never felt quite right. I never felt like I was turning fast enough, and there are some moments that are quite intense in Resident Evil 7 where you've got to move and you've got to get on your bike and get out of the way, and that's really slow incremental turning setting just didn't work for me. But they do give you an option to change it to a more standard turning option where it's not moving in increments, it just turns like a normal first-person shooter, and you can dial up how fast you want the turning speed to be. So I played around with both settings, and like I say, I didn't like the incremental turning, but the problem is the other option made me feel really sick, and this is probably on me. I probably should have stuck with the incremental turning, but what the end result is that I never found a control option that felt right and satisfying to me, and I did get really sick here. Like, I'm talking like Riggs Mechanized Combat League sick. I felt ill like for 2 or 3 hours after I'd put the controller down. Now, I know that there's a lot of variety in what people can tolerate in VR, and Capcom even recommends itself, play for in short periods in VR. You know, you want to build up your tolerance for the virtual reality. And actually, I think if you're just exploring the mansion and just walking around and you're not in a high combat scenario, it's actually pretty okay-ish comfortable. The problem probably for me was that I loaded up a later part of the game where there's a lot more action going on, and I actually did a boss fight, and that did not feel great in virtual reality. Having said that, you do get that enhanced sense of scale and that enhanced sense of immersion. So it's kind of swings and roundabouts. I don't think it's the perfect VR mode, and I'm going to say why. Because the game, while a lot of effort has been put into making the game VR compatible from start to finish, it's not a game that's been designed for VR. It's not the London Heist or something like that. And I think games that are designed specifically for VR, they work better. Whereas here you get a slight sense that things have been shoehorned in a little bit just to make it work in VR. And I'll give you another example of that. When you're aiming, you actually aim with your head. And again, that works fine in stuff like Res Infinite, but I didn't think it felt great here. I was wasting a lot of ammo in the boss fight that I just mentioned, and this is a game where you can't waste ammo. But I do think like this is promising. Like Capcom have made a game here that can be played in VR from start to finish. You don't need VR, but it's an option there, and that's really cool. And it does work. You know, like I mentioned earlier, seeing those familiar environments that I'd already seen on the television as I played through the campaign for the first time, then seeing them blown up into virtual reality was quite an eye-opening and an amazing experience. I would recommend that if you've got PlayStation VR and you're planning to buy this game, try both modes. Play it on the TV, play it on VR, have a fiddle with all of the control settings, see what works for you. The game is really good anyway, so even if you don't end up liking the VR mode all that much, you've still got a great game to play on your TV there. And if you do like the VR mode and it doesn't make you feel sick like it did for me, then happy days, play through the whole campaign in it. You've got options here, and I think that's the crucial part. Capcom's giving you lots of options to toggle how comfortable you want the experience to be, what kind of controls you want to use, and it's giving you the option to play with VR or without VR, and you can switch between the two. There's no problem with that. You don't have to create a separate save for VR play and a separate save for TV play. You can just use the same save, so it's all quite elegantly handled. Even though I wasn't overly in love with playing it in VR because it did make me feel ill, I still appreciate all of the options and the effort that was put into it. And then while it's not the best VR experience I've had with PlayStation VR, you know, it's cool that it's there, and I'd like to see more games at least try it. Because, you know, God knows we need more PlayStation VR content at the moment. But anyway, let me know what you're planning to do with PlayStation VR. Are you going to play Resident Evil 7 in the VR mode? Let me know in the comments section. I really want to hear from you. And thank you so much for watching. And remember to check out the review, if you haven't already, which talks more about the game itself rather than just the VR mode. Thanks so much for watching. See ya.